Welcome to First But Last, brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities. I am your host, Emmy DeGrappa. Wyoming is called the Equality State because we were the first to give women the right to vote. 150 years later, we wonder what Wyoming women think about the progress toward equality now. Let's find out, and thank you for listening. In this episode, we are talking to Dr. Robin Hill. She is a lecturer in computer science and an affiliate faculty member in both the Department of Philosophy and the Wyoming Institute for Humanities Research. She is also a member of the League of Women's Voters, and she is a representative on the Governor's Council for the Wyoming Women's Suffrage Celebration. Welcome, Robin.
Thank you.
Are you a native of Wyoming?
I am indeed. I was born here. My father was born here. My grandmother was born here, in fact, and my husband and I live in the house that my great-grandparents built.
Well, that is exciting. Now, how did you end up with the house? Was it after your parents died, they willed it to you, or?
Yes. I have cousins in town. There are other family houses around here. There are quite a few of us descended from that earlier generation, and I'm the one of my siblings who ended up in Laramie.
And what year was your house built?
1887.
Oh, wow. That takes some upkeep.
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. It's a charming old house with the emphasis on the old.
Well, where did you study philosophy and computer science, and how did you bring those two different degrees together?
I was a philosophy major here at the University of Wyoming in the 70s. And what I liked best was the logic classes in philosophy. And I found a British master's degree in mathematical logic. And so I went and did that study. And of course, there was some study of algorithms and a little programming involved. And so that's what took me into computer science. It was a straightforward path.
Is computer science a male-dominated field?
Yes, it's a male-dominated field. For no good reason that I can understand. I think women are perfectly well suited for it. These things do tend to take on a life of their own. So if there are a lot of men in a field, it becomes a male-dominated field because others tend to follow that trend. But there are plenty of opportunities, I think, for everybody. And I would encourage any girls, any women who are interested in this kind of thing, figuring things out analytically, to consider computer science.
Oh, that's great. And do you mentor young women so that they will enter into a field like computer science?
I haven't had a lot of opportunity to do that, nor a lot of success when I've had the opportunity. My young relatives don't tend to go into computer science. If they did, they would be welcome, and I'm sure they know that. But mostly, I think young women should pursue the studies or the activities that they're really interested in. And so if the young women I know want to do something else, then that's fine. That's what they should do.
Have you faced some challenges to succeed in the workforce in computer science?
I think so, probably. I tend to play those down. I think that there are many obstacles. There are many bumps in the road that are sort of hard for a young professional to figure out. I think that's true for both men and women. And it's not always clear if it's some kind of discrimination or dislike or some quirky thing that no one will ever really understand. I think I have done pretty well considering all that. I think that there are more overt problems in other women's careers. However, I don't want to minimize those. But I haven't suffered blatant discrimination.
Why did you get involved in the League of Women's Voters?
My grandmother helped establish the League of Women Voters in Laramie, I think in 1953. And so it's been kind of a family thing since then. My stepmother, Mignon Hill, was quite active. And then when she wanted to sort of retire from that kind of thing, she asked me to join and become active, and I did.
Okay. And so what was your desire to be on the Governor's Council and spearhead the suffrage celebration in Wyoming?
I went on professional leave from the university when I was working for the Center for Teaching and Learning. So, in working with collaborators, colleagues doing the same kind of thing at two well-known universities, Stanford and Oxford, I used Wyoming's history of female suffrage as a conversation starter. People often ask me to tell them something about Wyoming, and I would say that the territory was the first government in known history to grant general and unconditional female suffrage. And no one that I mentioned that to had known it before. I was surprised about that because it seems to be quite a significant development in Western history, and I thought it should be better known. When I came back here, and Weldon Tuck of the Swain Foundation was starting to discuss a major celebration for 2020, which would be the 150th anniversary of the first woman's vote, which of course took place in downtown Laramie by Louisa Swain on September 6th, 1870. I thought that that would be a great opportunity to put forth our history a little bit more, and also for some serious discussions about the right, privilege, and responsibility of the vote. So with other league members and other interested people, we called a meeting in 2015 of all of the women's groups and history groups we could think of, and out of that emerged some people who were committed to the idea, and out of that emerged a council and an executive declaration creating a governor's council by Governor Meade in 2016.
Wow, that's excellent. How does our suffrage celebration fit in with the national celebration being planned for 2020?
Well, that's a good question. We have been contacted by quite a few organizations about that because 2020, of course, is the centennial, the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote across the nation. But Wyoming was 50 years before that. Wyoming was 50 years ahead. And as I pointed out before, that doesn't seem to be widely known. So we would like to stake out our own little place in history by promoting our own anniversary in December 2019. On December 10th is the 150th anniversary of the passage of the Act. This was the act by the territorial legislature of Wyoming, the very first territorial legislature, in their very first session, the fall of 1869. They granted, both houses passed an act granting women the right to vote and to hold office, and it was signed by the governor, the territorial governor, Campbell, on December 10th. December 10th, 1869. So we hope to use that as the starting point for a few months of celebration, commemoration, exploration of the history of the women's vote and its significance. That would be leading up to the national anniversary, of course, only 100 years in 2020.
Why do you think they gave women the right to vote in Wyoming? What is your perspective on that?
I'm not a historian. That would be a great question to ask someone who has done the research. My research has been sort of superficial. But as I understand it, the history is murky. The historical record is sparse. The motivations are not clear. They're probably quite mixed. It did not seem to be a huge issue, interestingly enough. So there weren't a lot of pitched battles. There weren't a lot of opposing forces. There didn't seem to be the kind of contentious and bitter arguments that we see on the national level for the 19th Amendment, for national female suffrage. So Wyoming also tried to rescind female suffrage in 1871, I believe, and failed only just barely. But we just barely held on to our record as the first government in known history to grant general and unconditional female suffrage permanently. But we did it. I can't tell you how it happened. I wish somebody could. I think some research needs to be done, and that's one of the things that we would like to inspire with the Wyoming women's suffrage celebration.
Well, I read that during that time, men in the territory outnumbered women 6-1, and that leaders hoped the new law would encourage more women to settle in Wyoming.
Yeah, I think that was one of the motivations. That certainly comes up in some of the written accounts that have survived.
And so even though you're not a historian, what are the factors that make Wyoming so different? Why were the Western states the first states to give women the right to vote? Not just Wyoming, which led the way, but Montana, Colorado, Utah.
Well, that's another great question for some serious research. My impression or my guess might be that it just seemed to be the right thing to do. Certainly, there might have been a more democratic outlook in the Western states because people here had to work hard. This is kind of the stereotype that we take pride in, but I'm sure it has some elements of truth. So it didn't matter it didn't matter what your social status was so much, perhaps, as it did in more established cities and urban environments. And because of that, I think that it's possible that there was less contention and therefore less politics, that is to say, fewer ideological commitments that would have gotten in the way of this kind of progressive act. The other Western states that followed shortly thereafter, I don't know what the factors were in those places. I'm assuming that it was more or less the same thing. It just seemed like a good idea. And because of the kind of low-key politics, at least on this issue, a simple good idea could simply pass in the lawmaking bodies.
As I've been interviewing women across the state, and I plan to interview many more on this issue of the celebration of women's right to vote in Wyoming and how a woman sees herself as a woman in Wyoming, do you have anything to say about that?
A subject of discussion, whether we should really have the motto, the equality state. I think so. I'm not sure that opportunities for women are exactly equal to opportunities for men in the state. But there are so many factors involved. I'm not sure a generalization is even possible. So I feel fine about being a woman in Wyoming. And in fact, I'm not sure that it's even constructive to try to parse that. Really, what it depends on is not other people's expectations, or certainly not outsiders' expectations. And I think it's more about what we do as individuals, than how we are seen or how we see ourselves or how we see how other people see us.
Well, that was an excellent answer. I was just thinking that as I've been doing these interviews and talking to women, most women don't see themselves as being unequal to men. They feel like Wyoming is a state where you can do something if you really want to do it.
Sure. And I'm not sure that that's fault of any other place. I think that really what matters here is the decisions we make and the actions we take, not what we say about it all.
That's excellent. Well, I really appreciate talking to you, Robin. It's been really wonderful.
Well, thanks. I appreciate this too. And good luck with your project.
Thank you for listening to First But Last, brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities. Please join us again next week as we continue our conversations with women from around the state. You can also find us at thinkwy.org, where we continue the conversation on our blog about the history, journey, and the challenges of Wyoming's intrepid women living in the equality state. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show and leave us a review on iTunes. Thank you for listening.